well, it's 6:31, so why don't we go ahead and get started? So, welcome everyone. Welcome to How the Job is Done, the Civilian Conservation Corps on the New Jersey Palisades, a program at the Palisades Free Library. I'm Emily, the Adult Services Librarian, and I'll be hosting tonight's program. So, just a quick housekeeping item before we get started. Please keep yourself muted so we don't get background noise during the program. We'll have some Q&A at the end of the presentation when you can unmute and ask questions. Or you're welcome to type in your questions into the chat as we go along, and I can make sure they get answered at the end. Our guest this evening is Eric Nelsen. Eric is a historic interpreter at the Palisades Interstate Park in New Jersey, where he oversees the park's historic Kearney House and creates living history programs. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you and the library for inviting me. And thank you all for stopping in for a little bit of local history. I just want to just to clarify some terms right at the beginning. I'm as Emily said, I'm a historical interpreter for the Palisades Interstate Park in New Jersey. And so that make that clear. The Palisades Interstate Park Commission, my employer, is is the land in the commission's care is in the two states, New Jersey and New York. And in New York, it's well over 100,000 acres, consisting of quite a few state parks and historic sites. I mean, just the more well-known ones are Harriman, Bear Mountain, Tallman Mountain, right by Palisades Library there, Nyack Beach State Park, Rockland Lake, Minnewaska, Sterling Forest. It goes on and on and on. Any event. I don't work for that part of the park. I work for the New Jersey section, which is essentially one self-contained park. We're not spread across multiple parks. Whereas in New York, there's something around in the neighborhood of 140,000 acres of land. In New Jersey, we have about 2,500 acres, which is still not small, especially given where we are in Bergen County, New Jersey. And it's spread out over 12 thin miles right along the Hudson River. It never gets wider than about half a mile wide. In many areas, it's quite a bit more narrow than that, but it includes some of the most spectacular scenery in the lower Hudson River Valley, namely the Palisades Cliffs, which reach a height of about just over 500 feet right near the New York state line. We're also the original component of the Palisades Interstate Park system. The commission was created in 1900 with the specific goal of preserving the New Jersey Palisades from Fort Lee, 12 miles upriver to the New York state line. Preserving them from what? Well, obviously development, but more specifically, a number of huge quarries that were blasting the Palisades Cliff for building stone and for gravel, essentially, for crushed stone. And this assault on the beauty of the landscape resulted in this unique interstate effort where two states came together to combine resources and create a park right pretty much in the middle of an urban area in the country. And it was a dramatic and exciting thing that happened in 1900. It's the subject of another slideshow that's I can give at another time. But I just want to lay that background down. So when I speak of the park, I'm speaking specifically of the New Jersey section of the Palisades. All right, enough preamble. Our topic tonight is the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps, one of probably the most famous of the New Deal agencies that were established by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration after he took office in 1933. The CCC, as they were known, were in all 48 states through the 1930s. And the way they were organized is they were set up in camps. And if you joined the CCC, you were assigned to a camp in one of the United States. And these camps, well, you're going to see with your own eyes what these camps look like and so on. Who were you if you were in the CCC? On paper, you were between the ages of 18. I think they varied it a little bit as the program went along, but essentially 18 to young 20s is the ages that were accepted into the CCC. So you were young men. And you went to live in these camps and did work. This was largely Roosevelt's own brainchild, this program, and it's always said that this was his favorite of the numerous New Deal programs, the WPA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the all under the umbrella of the National Recovery Administration. They used to call it alphabet soup. They had all these agencies with different acronyms and so on. Some of them, like the WPA, employed, quite a few million men in the United States. The CCC, I think, was between 2 and 3 million of these young men were employed. But it was always said that this was Roosevelt's personal favorite out of this alphabet soup of programs that his administration created to try to get the country out of the depression it was in. He's had a particular fondness for the CCC, which opened its first camp, which was named Camp Roosevelt. Camp number 1 was, I believe, in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, was the first one to open, but it was soon followed by dozens of other camps. And his whole thinking was this was a way, besides providing economic relief, and we'll say quite a bit more about that in just a couple of minutes, but he also saw it as a way to get young men, especially men living in the cities, which, think back to the time period, think back to the 1930s. Air conditioning is a rarity. City streets tended to be filthy. It was not a healthful, wholesome environment for young people to be living in. But here was a chance for these young men to work in the outdoors, to get fresh air and wholesome exercise, and to contribute to the well, as the name implies, conservation, contribute to the natural beauty of the country and preserving the natural wonders of the United States and North America. And over the course of its 10 years or so, not quite 10 years that the CCC was in operation, as these 2 to 3 million young men participated in it, they planted literally, I believe it's in the billions of trees across the country, which is wonderful, and just in and of itself, but also remember the context. This was in the middle of the Great Depression, and one of the things spurring the Depression was the Great Dust Bowl that had occurred especially in the middle of the North American continent, where due to overgrazing, overfarming, like the soil was literally blowing away from millions of acres of land. And so this idea of planting trees to help retain soil and to improve conditions was a great, idealistic idea, and it was truly realized. I mean, they really did well. So that's the macro story. My focus, of course, is on the immediate area of the park that I work for and that I'm a historical interpreter for. So we're just going to show you. I'm going to move now from the nationwide story and move from camp number 1 to camps SP11 and SP12. The SP stands for State Park, and because a lot of these camps were set up on land that either the federal or state governments owned. And even though technically we may not be exactly a state park, we were designated with the SP thing. And we were very early. These camps were established on top of the Palisades cliffs in the towns of Alpine and Tenafly, New Jersey. And they sent one up, and then within a year, I believe they had set up the second camp. They were adjoining each other, basically. Let me go on. So here, just to set that scene now, as we zoom in, we've gone from looking at the whole wide United States with these CCC programs spreading across the whole country. Let's just focus in on what the Palisades were about at this time. So it's Roosevelt is inaugurated on March 4th, 1933. And then by the end of that first year in office, he has already been able to get the legislation passed through Congress to start this brainchild of his, this CCC program. And in December of 1933, they were already building Camp SP-11 on top of the cliffs in Alpine. And this is just a great shot from the 1930s showing what the park looked like at that point in that season of the year. But the park itself was a much busier place than it is today, which is you don't often get to say that about anywhere in the state of New Jersey, that there's less going on in 2024 than there was in 1933 in terms of use and development and so on. But as you'll see, that was absolutely the case in 1933. This wasn't a stretch of 12 miles of barren wilderness along the Hudson. On the top of the cliffs, it's years before the Palisades Interstate Parkway would be built. So the main north-south road on top of the cliffs is Route 9W, as it is today with the addition of the Palisades Parkway. And here you see this is right at the turnoff to get down to the river where the Yonkers Ferry used to cross from Yonkers, New York to Alpine, New Jersey. And that building you see no longer exists, but that was our park headquarters. Only a few years old in 1933. It housed our police, our engineering office, our administration offices, and so on. What were they administrating? Well, there was a number of large picnic areas and even campgrounds along the waterfront of the park, including in this shot, you're seeing the Englewood area and with a bathing beach in the river. And that's what's going on. You have people going for a swim in the river. Literally tens of thousands of people were crossing the river from New York to use this park. Again, it's not barren wilderness. And if you see here, you can see the brand new George Washington Bridge in the background. It opened in 1931, end of 1931. And crossing in front of it, you can see a fairly large ferry boat. That was the Dyckman Street Ferry. It left from Dyckman Street, Manhattan to Englewood, New Jersey. And that's most of the people you see crowding along the shore and taking a dip in the Hudson River came to the park on that ferry boat, or this part of the park on that ferry boat. There was another ferry, as I mentioned briefly, from Yonkers, about 5 miles north to the Alpine area. This is another, just north of where the last shot was, this is another bathing beach. And again, all the people you see here enjoying a day at the beach, almost all of them came by ferry from across the river, from upper Manhattan to the area, and then walked about a half mile up the trail along the river. And that's a big bathhouse that had been built about 10 years earlier so that people could change into their swimsuits. Up at Alpine again, this crowd would have, almost all of them would have come over from the Yonkers ferry to Alpine. These were vehicular ferries, by the way. In fact, the Dyckman Street Ferry, over 1 million vehicles crossed it in its peak operation in a year in its peak operation. The Yonkers Ferry, about half as many. It's a slightly smaller ferry operation. But you can see the kinds of crowds that were coming. So that's the setting that we have our CCC camps being built, but not along the waterfront. The camps are up on top of the cliffs, which is an interesting thing because in the first decades of the park, almost all the land it owned was along the riverfront with very little land on top of the cliffs, except for this one section right on the Tenafly Alpine border. It was a donation of land. I believe it was from the Rockefeller family, although I should really check that before I announce it. But it's 165 acres of land that had been donated to the park, in part because there was no development on it. There were big mansions on top of the cliffs and other smaller houses and so on along the Route 9W and whatnot. But this one section was just particularly rugged. It's very hilly and rocky. And right in the middle of this 165 acres was a large semi-marshy area, which is where they built the camp. Originally, the park's plan was to turn this into a recreation area. Think like what you have in Harriman, like with the lakes, like Sebago and Tyrati and so on. They were going to dam the stream that created this marshy area and create a pond where you could rent rowboats and so on. And then the Depression hit, and then the federal government asked if the park had a space suitable to create a CCC camp. And the park thought of this area, which was known as the Greenbrook area. That's the name of the main brook that goes through this area, the Greenbrook. And so they hadn't dammed it up yet. They had this open space. And that's where in December of 1933, they began to build SP 11, the camp of the CCC. It is very worth mentioning the Depression. It's almost hard. It's difficult to imagine the level of economic displacement that was caused when the stock market bottomed out at the end of 1929. By the early 1930s, unemployment was stubbornly staying at around 25%. One quarter of the working population could not find a job. So do keep that in mind. These were incredibly desperate days. We've all seen the photos of the Dust Bowl farmers fleeing, to California to hope to find agricultural work there. We've seen the pictures of soup lines and soup kitchens in the cities, like right in New York City and other cities. So these were dire times. And so the first crew of CCC members showed up. And now one more little detour into terminology. I'm going to use the terms that were used during the time. And in general, people, when they talked about the young men who were working in the CCC, they referred to them often as CCC boys. And that's not, when I use that term, I'm not using it as in any derogatory sense at all when I say CCC boys. Or sometimes they were just referred to as the CCCs. Like, oh, there's a camp with the CCCs over there, that kind of thing. So here's our first group of CCC boys in our camp on top of the cliffs in the Greenbrook area. And you see, they're actually helping with the construction of their own camp, their own facility that they're going to live in. You see them at work outside of some kind of storage shed, storage facility, digging, hard work. Now, these how were they compensated? So the CCC program had it that if you were accepted as a CCC, you got your housing, your food, you got your clothing, that was issued to you. Again, think of the savings for a family, especially I always imagine, a mother on her own, her husband has died or left the family, and she has one or more teenage boys she's taking care of. They're living in a city or otherwise urban area. Unemployment is at 25%. That's a recipe for this kid to get into trouble, if you think about it. He's going to be out on the streets with time on his hands. And now here's this program where he is now going to be fed, clothed, housed, supervised by mostly former Army officers were the main supervisors for the CCC camps, um, and and so that in itself is a huge savings, both financially and mentally for the parents of these young men. But beyond that, they were paid $30 a month, essentially $1 a day, paid at, I believe, at the end of the month. But $5 went to the CCC boy, which $5 won't get you nothing today. But in 1933, 1934, that's not peanuts. That's enough to go out to a couple of movies when you have a night off, maybe, car fare or bus fare to get to a local town like Tenafly and catch a movie and get a burger at the diner or what have you. 25 of that 30 is sent home to your mother. And now what a blessing. She might have other younger children or girls who are who need to be cared for as well. And now they're getting $25 a month thanks to the work of their son. Question that some people ask, were there any CCC camps for girls? And there was at least one, like, sort of experimental one. I believe it was up in Harriman, if I'm not mistaken. But it was primarily like a lot, I mean, the biases of the days and so on. You still had that divide of men do the work, women take care of the house. That was beginning to change. And again, I don't mean to go into a whole side topic. I want to focus on what's going on in the Palisades. But these camps on the Palisades were male. There's a close up of that same shot. Oh, it's the supply house. um, and yeah, that looks about right, like around 18, 19, 20. Although there's a good chance one or two of these guys is younger than that. And I have it on good authority. Young man who joined, and in 1934, basically the first full year of operation. He ended up living in Emerson, New Jersey, just down the road from me, in fact. He joined, I think he was 16 when he joined, and he had a fake ID. He lived in New York City, had a fake ID made up. And from what he said, he wasn't the only one, because this was, again, financially, it was a great dividend. It was also an adventure, though. You're going to go live in the woods. And he and others have said, like, they thought maybe they would be going out to Wyoming or something like that. And some CCCs certainly did. There were CCC camps out in New Mexico and Wyoming and elsewhere, but he ended up in Alpine, New Jersey. But regardless, it was a real adventure. You're living with a whole bunch of other young men from all different towns and so on, and doing some really cool stuff, working with big saws and learning some skills. So here's what their camp looked like. This was not a small operation, and it looks very much like some kind of army camp or something. And again, it was kind of modeled on the military, model. It was a core. Close up of some of the buildings. So there were barracks, there were cookhouses, dining halls, supply rooms, and all kinds of things. He was like kind of looking down their main street. Interesting thing too. So they start building this camp in December of 1933. They occupy it early in the year and are up and running, which just happens to be that winter of 1934, to this day, remains the coldest winter in this part of the country on record. So these guys move into their new camp, and then they're dealing with incredible cold, lots and lots of snow, multiple blizzards over the several months of winter. So it must have been a real kind of thing. Here you see close up again. The camps were essentially segregated as well. You will see basically white faces in all these photos. There was a African American camp also in Bergen County, during this time period as well. And if we have time, we can go into that. But again, it's outside of the scope of the area I'm talking about. But and it's yeah, it was still, very much a segregated world that was existing. So you can see here's from the park's annual report, which is a great source of information. They used to publish these wonderful multi-page annual reports detailing all the work that was done in the park and so on. And this is some quotes from that. And it mentions that one of the most important of the projects that there's these two CCC camps in the Greenbrook area did was doing erosion control work above Henry Hudson Drive. For those who don't know Henry Hudson Drive, it's a scenic roadway that today extends from the park's southern entrance in Fort Lee, right at the Edgewater border, up about 7 miles to Alpine by exit 2 of the PIP. In the 1930s, they were still working on the very southern extent of it. So it basically went from Englewood Cliffs to Alpine, about 5 or 6 miles. And it's built literally right at the toes of the Palisades cliffs on the pile of rock that extends from the river to the base of the cliffs. And it's an audacious site to build a road. And so one of the projects they did was try to build retaining walls to try to protect that road. And these are what from the annual report again, this is what these teenage boys in the 1930s were building primarily by hand. I just astounds me. They were using ropes and pulleys and that kind of thing, and wooden sleds to basically haul the rocks up the hillside. They were breaking the rocks, and there's plenty of rocks beneath the Palisades, but they have to be broken to size and then fitted together. It's all drywall construction, no cement in them. And here you see some of that construction going on. And they kind of hit the ground running with this. And in 1934, they were full on at work on building these tremendous retaining walls above Henry Hudson Drive. So you see them here. That's you can see some of the tools. And incredibly, according to the annual reports, they built, I forget how many, square yards of wall and so on. And there were no injuries reported during this. I mean, a bunch of basically teenagers with sledgehammers and picks and hauling big rocks around, and there's certainly no serious injuries. I'm sure there were some stubbed toes and maybe a broken finger or two, but there were no serious injuries. Here you see some of them. Here's another page from one of our annual reports, just calling out some of the things that the CCC was doing. These two CCC. By the way, how many CCC boys were in these camps? I think combined, it would have been 200 plus. At any given time, and they cycled through. You did a few months, and then I think you could re-up if you wanted to, or some people just left and went on their way. But here you see among the work they were doing were killing tent caterpillars that were causing harm to trees, and dealing with Dutch elm disease, spraying and trimming of trees, planting planting trees, some 330 dead and diseased trees were removed. Something it doesn't mention on this particular page, but another thing they did, hemlock, not hemlock, hemlocks were having their problems too, but chestnut, American chestnut trees had suffered a terrible blight beginning in the 19 teens. And hundreds of these trees were still left standing in the 1930s. And that was a lot of that was harvested by the CCCs and even used in park construction. If you go to some of our old pavilions or State Line Lookout, the refreshment stand there, almost all of that beautiful rusticated timbers that are used, that's all chestnut that was harvested along the Palisades from the standing dead of the chestnut forest that had been killed. So the park has its annual reports, but something that's wonderful that we found is the camps had their own newspapers that newsletters, whatever you want to call it. They're basically mimeograph operations. And through a donation, it will get hold of a bunch of copies of there were several. This one you see is the Cliff Top Commentator. Um, and so the boys themselves wrote, edited, and printed these uh um these newsletters, and they have, they have local news of the camp and so on, and it's a really rich source to provide a little bit of color for what their life was like. And something else we have that you don't see a lot of is we have some interior shots in the camp, which are hard to come by in my experience. Like if you Google search CCC camps, you tend to find many more pictures of the exteriors than interiors. But here in our photo collections, probably taken by park photographers, we see inside some of their dwellings. You can see they have nature displays, they have some art, and they're working on something at that table. And when we zoom in, looks like they're making like model boats. Looks like maybe a Viking ship or a galleon or something like that. And the man in the center, he's not a CCC boy. He would be one of the adult leaders of the camp. But the man on the right is almost certainly one of the CCCs. And so they're doing craft projects, keeping these guys entertained with different like I say, craft activities. You'll see more. But and big difference from hanging out on a city street getting in trouble. Remember, we're in a world where there's no television, and certainly no computers or anything like that, obviously. Um, Movies are a rarity. We know that the CCC boys from our camps did go to the movies, like I say, in Tenafly. Sometimes a little bit of friction with the locals, like who are these city kids coming into our fine town and, maybe making some noise at the diner or something. I haven't heard of any serious issues, but just more, a little bit of uptightness from the locals, maybe, but no real problems. But you see the stuff on the shelves in their building. I assume this is some kind of common building, like either a dining hall or a recreation hall in the camp. And you see more of what's going on the shelves. See the type of things that would have been of interest to them. These guys look like they're also working on models and stuff. There's a lot of neat detail in this photo here with these guys working. You can see in the background along the wall, you have a whole bunch of different types of trees that are identified. So it help you learn how to identify trees by their bark. which the boys themselves probably, worked on creating that display. And they're still building model ships. Somebody at a program I did pointed out that's a shortwave radio set on the table, on the workbench there. So they've been doing some shortwave radio type stuff. There's a phonograph up on the higher shelf there. Um, As or close up on that shot showing those tree samples. It was a conservation corps. The idea is, come along, young man, you're going to learn about what the woods is. And you hear in anecdotal accounts like it was an adventure, and even going to Alpine, New Jersey could be a bit scary. You grew up in the city, whether that city's New York City or Hackensack, New Jersey, or what have you, you're not familiar with snakes and other critters that live in the woods. And so, it was an adventure, even in the local setting like we have here. I'm going to just come back to that. Before we move off of these interior shots, I do want to talk about how they ate, because you can't keep a bunch of, 200 or more teenage boys around without feeding them. And again, these are kids, many of which were, let's say, underprivileged, living in the city, not maybe on the best diet and so on. And now they're sent here and doing hard work out, moving rocks around, cutting down trees and sawing up the wood that they cut down and splitting it for use in their wood burning stoves to heat their buildings in the cold weather and so on. And it was, and I'm reading now from a book. I can give the details on it later if anyone wants to find it. It's by Kathleen Duxbury, who I've had the joy of working with a little bit over the years, who's a great independent CCC researcher. She's all over the country. And she wrote a book called The Boys of Bergen, Remembering the Civilian Conservation Corps in Bergen County, New Jersey. So definitely look for that if I've whetted your appetite with this program. But one of the great details in this about food, average weight gain was 11.5 pounds in the first few months. So these kids came to work. Let's see them again. These kids came on average gained about 11 pounds, even though they were busting their backs working, doing hard work and so on. They were still putting on the pounds. And then, so typically at Alpine Camp SP11, the meals varied each day, but breakfast would be prunes or some combination of what I'm reading now. Keep prunes, hotcakes, syrup, butter, fried bacon, and coffee. Lunch, hash, macaroni and cheese, bread, coffee, cobbler. Dinner, baked ham, mashed potatoes, brown gravy, peas, bread, butter, coffee, and rice pudding. And then there was a camp in Teterboro, in Bergen County, that had about 165 young men in it. The Alpine camps, again, were larger. It had, I believe, between 200 and 300 men. So, but this is the statistics for that smaller Teterboro camp that's quoted in Kathleen's book. And this is for one day, 165 young men, 30 dozen eggs, 200 pounds of potatoes, 160.5 pint bottles of milk, 12 pounds of butter, 60 gallons or 30 cans of milk, 15 gallons of soup, 130 loaves of bread, 2 bushels of vegetables, 160 packages of cereal, 20 pounds of coffee, 120 pounds of meat, and a crate of apples or oranges for one day at our CCC camp. So here's the Cliff Top Commentator, their newsletter. And this is a story that really has resonated with us, as I'll be able to show you. Here are the boys. It's 1937, so the camp has been in operation um, for over 3 years at that point. Several hundred young men have cycled through this camp in that time. And in this article, it's a two-page spread. They're talking about building stone picnic tables in the park, and it has it basically lays out how we did this job. In fact, the title of this talk is "How the Job is Done." It's from this article. You can see on the upper left the title there, "How the Job is Done." And here you see them at work at these tables at one of our picnic areas in the park, right alongside Henry Hudson Drive. And this was fairly skilled work. This is real masonry work. And this is what the tables look like when they were built. And they built dozens of these. And here they are later that same year with people using them in the picnic area. Must have been very satisfying to build these really attractive, useful tables, and then later in the season actually seeing the public enjoying them and using them. And just another page from an April 1937 Cliff Top Commentator. An appeal. What do you think I am, a chump? Uh, Police up around the barracks? Nuts. It's like the vernacular of the day there, and talking about the importance of having to clean the camp, having to clean the buildings, and what's the point of complaining about it? It's what we all have to do. So here we are again, working on retaining walls above Henry Hudson Drive. This continued for over the course of the decade. They were continuing on these projects. Yeah, you see the little close up there. And that's another shot of some of the completed walls that these young men built. Oh, it can't be all work and no play. And in their clifftop commentators, we find several times where they're hosting dances. They get, I guess they try to send out well, some of them have girlfriends, and are inviting them, but they do, Saturday night dances at the camp. And so there's an article about the success and that they had there, and on Saturday night, April 3rd, and then so kind of a gossipy, fun little column about things that were overheard during the camp, during the dance, and so on. Here they're building a wall in front of a little waterfall in the park along the drive here. We'll close up on that a little. So you see, we're getting later into the 1930s now. The work is getting a little more varied as they're doing things here. Here they're dealing with road repairs. I'm pretty sure, no, I'm not sure if this is like repairing a road after a rock slide or if it's just some other kind of road repair. But this would be on the road that goes down from exit 2 today down to Alpine Boat Basin. And let me just say, why is there a policeman there, a guy in traffic? This was a busy road in its way because of the Yonkers Ferry operating at the base of this road. And again, at this point in the 1930s, the George Washington Bridge has opened, and it's really put a crimp in the ferry operations. The Dyckman Street Ferry went from over 1 million vehicles a year down to 300,000 and then less every year after that. The Yonkers Ferry did a little better because they were further from that new bridge, and so they were able to maintain more ridership. But they went from about 500,000 down to like 400,000, 300,000 and some. But still, this is an active road, hence the policeman standing there with his white gloves on to direct traffic while this work is going on. Here they're planting around their new walls that they had built. That's what they're doing here. They're planting they're passing up basically sod, like patches of grass to place to help secure these drywall walls. Here you see them doing that. And then they got another shot of finished walls in the park. June frolic here in 1938. We're going to some homemade art there. Oh, now this is a different. We remember the Clifftop Commentator. Now they have the Palisades Press, um, and a page of comics. Some of the boys have some skill at drawing comics, and you can see, you know, Independence question mark day, July 4th, and poor kid is stuck on KP, Kitchen Patrol, having to wash dishes and so on. And then there's some jokes I'm not even seem to be in jokes that would have made sense to the boys, but I can kind of get a gist from them, but not really, what the humor really meant. An oddball picture of a deer that had fallen to its death and is being removed. The only reason I'm showing it is just because what's written on the truck. United States Department of the Interior, National Park Service, CCC. So they did have access to vehicles provided for work there. That where that deer fell down to its death was Greenbrook Falls, which is the waterfall formed by Greenbrook, the biggest waterfall in the park. Here you see something that's all too familiar to many of us who work for the park: trees falling on Henry Hudson Drive and creating a situation that needs to be cleared up. Today, we would send probably a piece of equipment and some chainsaws out to do it. Here, they're kind of doing it the old-fashioned way with two-man pull saws to saw it up. Oh yeah, look at a big chunk of the side. See, that's what the retaining walls are trying to if not prevent, at least retard the progress of the natural erosion. This is an interesting page from one of the camp newsletters, just showing where people came from in the camp. So you had 23 people from Jersey City, 15 from New York, 14 from Garfield, 13 from Patterson, a dozen from Wallington, 11 from Bayonne, 8 from Newark, 7 Passaic. All of those higher numbers where people come from are all fairly urban towns. And then as you go down the list to where you just have one or two coming, they tend to be the smaller suburban towns, like Oradell or Ridgefield and so on. And these towns would have been much more suburban, if not almost rural, back in the 1930s, 1939. It wasn't until after the Depression ended and World War II began and then ended that the real the real growth of the modern suburbs of Bergen County really took off. Everything was kind of stalled so even though you had this new bridge, you still had, very almost rural communities in what's now. Oh, so the camps existed in the winter, of course. They were 12 months a year. And here you see them clearing snow off the road, the old-fashioned way with shovels. There you see one of the leaders. I've heard anecdotally that a lot of the leaders in Alpine there, the officers of the camp, as I mentioned, were former Army officers, and many of them were Southerners. With that to these boys, strange accents and, different kinds of behavior, different kinds of ideas of discipline and so on. And they were, I've been told we're tough as nails, these guys. Here they're using a tractor and a plow that it's towing to do some snow clearing on the road, and I think having a little fun. And they're posing for the pictures and smiling, and even those tough officers are smiling at the camera. And here you see the kids having a little bit of fun, weighting down the plow so that it gets better purchase on the road. More shots of inside the camp. And we're back to the shot that I kind of started us with. Um, and a very brief mention in our annual report for 1942. And what has changed? The big thing that has changed is at the end of 1941, of course, Pearl Harbor was bombed. And the United States entered the Second World War in the Pacific and very quickly entered the war in Europe. And the CCC basically folded its tent almost immediately. These young men were needed elsewhere. Interestingly, um, it is sometimes argued, and I think effectively argued, that this program, with over 2 million young men assigned to live in basically in a military type context and doing, work together as teams, was an important leg up in the war effort, where we had a very small army that suddenly had to be expanded by draft. And that, here you have a couple of million young men who had this kind of training, even though it was explicitly civilian training. For example, the Army Corps of Engineers snapped these guys up because of the skills they had working together in teams and doing construction projects and so on. But here you see June 26, 1942, the CCC authorities advised that the camp in the park would be withdrawn within 5 days for defense purposes. And then a thank you to the CCC Corps. After the camp closed and the buildings were torn down, they eventually did build that dam and flood that open marshy area. But by that point, instead of a recreation area, the decision had been made to make it a nature center, and that's Greenbrook Sanctuary, that 165 acres on top of the cliffs, where once there were two CC camps, is now Greenbrook Sanctuary. It's owned by the park, but run independently by the Palisades Nature Association. And this is roughly where that photo was taken today. It's a beautiful pond in there. Here's another cartoon as we bring this in for a landing. And this poor guy is being assigned to KP for the weekend. And he's literally shooting daggers out of his eye at the officer. And my colleague Francesca, who was supposed to be doing this program with me, but she had another obligation tonight. But shout out to her because she's been so much help with our research. But we just love this caption on it. Why should these things happen? We being signed to KP. We want to make a T-shirt with this someday. Here's remember our guys building those stone tables in the park and what they look like. And then the stone lasts and lasts and lasts. The wood, of course, rots with time. And over the years, not too long ago, a lot of them had gotten very, very rotted out. And one of my other colleagues, Anthony Taranto, set out to try to fix these up and improve them. And that's the results of that. And one of his assistants at the time, Lisa, was helping with that. And that's Tony right there. And transforming this and bringing it back to itself again. As you again, the stone will last more or less forever. Or at least for many decades to come. The wood needs to be replaced every few decades. this is the last page of one of the newsletters, and a kind of fitting landing point, perhaps, where he's saying the writer is saying goodbye to a group, that's cycling out of the camp, and wishing them good luck and God bless you, and a new group will be coming in and finding their way around the camp. That's the entrance sign that used to stand at what's now, I assume this was near where now is the entrance to Greenbrook Sanctuary on 9W. This sign stood at one time. And that gets me to the end of my slides here with this beautiful shot. You're looking down the length of the park, seeing almost the whole 12 miles from the north looking south. And I'm going to call on, there she is. I'm going to call on Emily to help manage questions and comments and so on. And take it away, Emily.
Thanks so much, Eric.